Lando Norris is the 2025 Formula One World Champion. But this is not your typical dominant champion story. This is the guy who admitted he might not be mentally strong enough, who was 34 points behind teammate Oscar Piastri after an engine failure at Zandvoort, and still turned the season on its head. Tonight, we're breaking down how a soft, overthinking, mistake-prone driver turned brutal pressure, public doubt, and a tricky McLaren into the most unexpected title run of modern F1, and why this championship says more about his mind than his lap times. Let's be honest. When you hear world champion, you think of dominance. Verstappen wiping the floor with everyone. Hamilton controlling seasons like he's on rails. Schumacher turning Sunday into his personal routine. Lando Norris doesn't fit that template. His 2025 title wasn't built on a flawless car and a bulletproof ego. It was built on stumbles, self-doubt, a car that never felt quite natural, and a driver who had to change the way he thought about himself just to stay in the fight. That's exactly why this story hits different. The season actually started in the most deceptive way possible. With a dream. Australia. Clean race, sharp qualifying, execution on point, and McLaren finally looking like a genuine title contender. Social media went crazy. Edits, compilations, Norris-era captions, people announcing the end of the Verstappen age and the beginning of something new. But under that perfect result, Lando already knew something was off. The 2025 McLaren was fast, but it was weird. New aero regulations had pushed the team into a different mechanical direction. The suspension geometry gave more peak performance but less natural feel. And every time he turned into a fast corner, there was this tiny delay between his hands and the car's response. To the outside world, McLaren had built him a weapon. Inside the cockpit, the weapon sometimes felt like it might fire in the wrong direction. That's where the mistakes started to snowball. Not because Lando forgot how to drive, but because he was trying to close the gap between what the stopwatch said and what his instincts were screaming. China brought a lockup in a critical qualifying lap. Bahrain turned into a classic case of overdriving, breaking that fraction too late, running wide, losing track position he didn't need to gamble away. Saudi Arabia, Canada, moments where one tiny misjudgment ruined an otherwise strong weekend. One by one, pundits built the narrative they'd been waiting years to push. Lando Norris is quick, but mentally, he's not that guy. The pressure wasn't just external. The real fight was happening inside his own helmet. Most champions pretend they're made of stone. Lando isn't like that. He has always been open about nerves, anxiety, and mental fragility. Normally, that honesty makes him easy to connect with as a fan. But when you're supposed to lead a world championship, every sentence about not feeling strong enough becomes fuel for the critics and ammunition for your own inner voice. While Oscar Piastri looked ice cold, calculating and unbothered, Lando looked like the more emotional one, brilliant on his day, raw around the edges on others. For a while, it looked like this season was going to prove the harshest version of his reputation right. And then, quietly, the first key twist arrived, not in a dramatic overtake, but on the setup sheets in Canada. McLaren made a significant change to the suspension geometry. No big Netflix moment, no Hollywood speech, just engineers doing what they do. But for Lando, it was like switching from a blurry TV to HD. Turn-in became more predictable, the car talked to him more clearly on the limit, and he could finally push without feeling like he was guessing. The lap times tightened up. The silly little errors started to fade, and his confidence grew in a way no motivational quote could ever create. This is the part casual fans often miss. Sometimes a driver's mental strength is just a function of whether the front end of the car actually goes where they expect when they turn the wheel. Still, if you're waiting for the smooth comeback arc, this is not that story. Because right when things started to stabilize, Zandvoort detonated everything. Post-summer break, fresh engine parts, fresh focus, and a championship picture that still had Norris absolutely in play. He did what he needed to do, put himself in the right place, and the engine died. No mistake, no misbreak, no driver error, just brutal, mechanical betrayal. The result on the table after that weekend. Oscar Piastri 34 points ahead, 9 races to go. In a sport where momentum is everything, that gap might as well have been a wall. This is the real climax of the season, and it didn't happen on track. It happened in the conversations Lando had with himself and with his inner circle afterwards, because this was the moment where a different version of Norris would have quietly shifted his target. Okay, maybe this year is gone. Let's just try to finish strong. The interviews could have stayed positive. The public would have understood, and the narrative would have been ready-made. Heartbreak, bad luck, maybe next year. Instead, Zandvoort forced him into a much uglier and more important question. If I keep doing things exactly the same way, same preparation, same mindset, same reactions when things go wrong, do I actually believe I can take 34 points out of Piastri? The answer was no. And that honest no became the foundation of everything that came next. From that point, the season stopped being just about driving fast and started being about rebuilding the system around him. Lando expanded and sharpened his support network. He wasn't just talking to people who made him feel better, he started listening more to the people who challenged him. Simulator time stopped being a grind for the sake of optics and turned into focused, scenario-based work, recovering after mistakes, adapting to changing balance, simulating exactly the kind of high-pressure situations where things had been falling apart. Off track, he became more deliberate. Sleep, recovery, media exposure, boundaries with constant online noise. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't content-friendly, but it was real. He stopped trying to prove he was mentally strong and started doing the boring, uncomfortable things that actually make you mentally stronger. And that's when the second big twist hit. The results finally began to reflect the work. Races that would previously spiral out of control after one bad corner started to settle. A poor qualifying wasn't the end of the weekend. It became a problem to solve, not a personal failure. On the radio, we saw less frantic emotion and more calm correction. Then came the stretch that flipped the championship script completely. Mexico and Brazil, back-to-back wins that turned Norris's collapsing into Norris's coming. These weren't chaotic lottery wins. They were controlled, grown-up drives. Tire management on point, overtakes chosen smartly rather than desperately. Risk-reward judged through the lens of a 24-race season, not a single highlight reel. Suddenly, that 34-point gap didn't look so permanent. The pressure, however, shifted. Now every race felt like a final. And here's where the version of Lando Norris we thought we knew would normally crack. The old script says, under intense pressure, the mistakes come back, the self-doubt gets louder, and the story ends with fans saying, yeah, he's good, but he's not a champion. Instead, 2025 gave us something far more interesting. The mistakes did come back. Vegas, Qatar, messy corners, imperfect weekends. But they no longer defined everything. For the first time, Norris treated his own errors the way the greats do, as data, not doom. He took the hit, adjusted, and moved on before the whole weekend collapsed. By the time we reached the decisive final rounds, the picture had flipped. Piastri, once in control, suddenly had a real fight on his hands. McLaren were walking a tightrope managing both drivers. Every point, every pit call, every sector mattered. And in the middle of it, Lando made the most un-Netflix, un-clickbait choice imaginable. He didn't try to become someone else. He didn't transform into a cartoon villain. Didn't start throwing desperation lunges or playing political games over the radio. He doubled down on the version of himself that had actually brought him back into the fight. Fast, fair, honest, occasionally messy, but now emotionally stable enough to see the long game. That's why, when he finally wrapped up the 2025 Formula One World Championship, it felt different from the usual coronation. This wasn't the story of a driver born with a killer instinct who simply waited for the right car. It was the story of a guy who heard, over and over again, that he wasn't ruthless enough, wasn't tough enough, wasn't wired like a champion, and instead of trying to cosplay as someone he wasn't, he turned his self-awareness into a weapon. He used his honesty to diagnose the parts of his preparation that weren't working. He admitted, out loud, that repeating the same old habits would never beat Oscar Piastri over a full season. And then, he actually changed those habits. Only 35 drivers in 75 years have ever touched that trophy. Some, like Jenson Button, wrote one beautiful, almost poetic season and never repeated it. Others, like Schumacher, Hamilton, and Verstappen, turned that first title into the foundation of an era. We don't yet know which path Lando Norris will take. Maybe this was his one perfect storm. A year where McLaren nailed the car just enough, circumstances broke his way just enough, and his newfound mental resilience lined up perfectly with opportunity. Or maybe, and this is the more frightening thought for the rest of the grid, 2025 was simply the moment he finally believed the thing everyone else had been saying for years, that he actually is good enough. Because in the end, the real plot twist of this season wasn't that Lando Norris beat Oscar Piastri or Max Verstappen or anyone else on the timing screens. The real twist was that the biggest opponent he had to defeat to become world champion was the voice inside his own head. And now that he's beaten that version of himself once, every title fight from here on won't just be about whether McLaren are fast enough. It'll be about whether the rest of the grid can handle a Lando Norris who finally races like a man who believes he belongs at the very top.